This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 9th of March 2021, and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, last-ditch bid to save Handshake. In the Standard, twists and turns in UHURU RAILA deal. And in the Star, chaos rock UHURU's 2022 succession plan. Sounds like a typo. Well, we have a three-part criteria that we will use to break down those headlines. We'll ask ourselves whether it is topical or speculative, whether it is repetitive or groundbreaking, whether it is thoughtful or just plain lazy. I may want to just toss the Star right off the bat for a grammatical
typo. What was it? Something rock
instead of rocks.
Yeah, anyway.
Let's begin.
So, happy birthday, Handshake. And while we celebrate the 3rd anniversary of the Handshake, I think we ought to reflect also on how we as Kenyans fail often at noticing patterns of interaction. In the last 8 years, we have noticed a pattern of absurdity. And the country has refused to embrace this absurdity for fear that we are not in control. Because absurdity occurs when the need for the individual understanding meets the unreasonable structure of our world. We need stability, and the world does not always have that in store, and those things are not always aligned. When Uhuru Kenyatta announced his bid for the presidency, some laughed. Not only was it shocking to think of another Kenyatta in power, but as a country, we had decided that it was a political sin for one Kikuyu to inherit another Kikuyu. So we decided that we would arrange our leadership systems to reflect that. It sounded absurd that a Kenyatta would inherit Kibaki, but then it happened. In 2018, after the emergence of a rogue judiciary, 2 elections, and trillions of shillings lost, Raila Odinga swore himself in as the people's president. He stood on the line of treason and boycotted the results of the country's decision. Things weren't looking good for Baba Man, even as the bearded sisters abandoned him. But then he survived. No one saw the handshake coming. It was in the realm of the absurd. And yet, it happened. And so today, as we reflect on the 3rd birthday of the handshake, we review again that which the country thinks is absurd, but is going to happen. On the 21st of September 2020, former Chief Justice David Maraga did what we here at the Fifth Estate had already foreseen. He advised the president to dissolve parliament. Again, just like the above, the possibility of it sounded absurd, but then it happened. But there's more to the advisory, and that was only one part of the absurdity. Part 2 is in the hands of the president. Article 261, Section 7 of the Constitution reads that if Parliament fails to enact legislation, the CJ shall advise the president to dissolve Parliament, and the president shall dissolve Parliament. Thanks to Maraga, the president now has a trump card that is constitutionally vague and without a timeline.
Yes.
It is possible, probable, and constitutional for Uhuru Kenyatta to dissolve Parliament. Again, this may sound absurd, but it's going to happen. As a country, we must be missing something if absurdity keeps surprising us, despite it being very obvious. So just like the Daily Nation says, last-ditch bid to save the handshake, maybe the handshake has ended its usefulness.
Maybe it was not intended to last.
Exactly.
Can I toss the Daily Nation based on your
definitely.
commentary? Fantastic. I love the absurdity approach.
I want to ask a question. Where would we have been if the handshake did not happen? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you recall, we were not in a good place around January, February 2018. We had just emerged out of a bitterly contested election in which the country was split right down the middle. Uhuru controlled the majority with about 54% of the vote. The rest was Raila and his supporters. And to be honest, the 2017 election clash was not a fight about a right and a wrong. It was a contest between two rights. Yes, Uhuru had won the election, But Raila was not without a point. He commanded the popular will of nearly 50% of the country. But because of the nature of our constitution, our half-baked constitution, there was no room for him in the political system. And so what were he and his supporters supposed to do? And you know, that's what led to the handshake. The political tension was palpable. The economy took a massive hit. Between August and November 2017, we lost 1 billion shillings every working hour, or 1 trillion shillings, the equivalent of 40% of the budget of that year.
Yeah.
And so this fragile state of affairs is what led to the handshake, and that's what we celebrate today. Now, as a result of the handshake, today the destructive nature of opposition politics as we knew it, led by Raila Odinga, has died down significantly, allowing the president room to implement his development agenda. As a result of the handshake, Ruto's raw, naked ambition has also been tamed. Now, being the rebel that he is, can you imagine what he would have done to backstab Uhuru in the absence of a handshake? He would have said no to building bridges, denying the Uhuru the opportunity to lead us away from darkness of constitutional rigidity into light of accommodation. He would have sabotaged and undermined Uhuru at every turn, all in an effort to cast his boss in bad light as an incompetent leader. And finally, he would have even sponsored an impeachment of the president and his key allies in the typical House of Cards fashion. But Uhuru Kenyatta, unlike Ruto, is a chess player and a superior one at that. And on that note, happy birthday, handshake.
I like
the
that.
handshake is built on a solid foundation of self-interest,
There you go.
not trust.
Yeah.
And that is why it will succeed.
Yeah.
So it still remains strong.
Yeah.
It remains
Despite
strong.
what the headlines are saying, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
So the headline in today's Standard spoke of the twists and turns in Uhuru-Raila deal. And yesterday, we submitted that Raila in a crisis is like a fish in water. Raila uses crisis as a decoy or a way to move forward, and he uses this as his shock doctrine strategy. We know this because we have understood Raila's politics. We can predict his next moves. We also submitted yesterday that Uhuru is probably the most discussed but least studied politician, and therefore he is harder to predict.
That's right.
I want to hypothesize that Uhuru may be using a dog whistling strategy. Uhuru is a student of the Moi School of Politics, and he was taught that in politics you have to be vague. And the vaguer you are, the more you're able to achieve your intentions without being bothered.
Yeah.
Uhuru is indeed a hard politician to read, but we can apply some techniques to try and understand him. And one way is to read him as a politician is from what Niccolo Machiavelli taught us in The Prince, that a politician must not be good. There's virtue in being bad. So ask yourself, between Uhuru and Raila, who is being a good politician? In Harold Bloom's Lucifer Principle, we know that good attracts bad, and that bad attracts good. Every virtue has a corresponding vice. Good and evil are two sides of the same coin. I posit here that Uhuru Kenyatta uses goodness in order to attract badness to himself.
Oh my gosh.
The more bad he attracts, the more he liberates himself. He is not captive to anybody. The handshake was genius because Uhuru used a mirror imaging strategy. And so he used it to be at one with the enemy in order to unsettle them. You see, a mirror reflects even the things you don't like about yourself. And it is therefore perfect. It is a perfect tool for deception. For when a man mirrors his enemy by doing exactly as he does, he gives an enemy the illusion that they actually share some values. So between Uhuru and Raila, who is using subtle deception to derail the other? On the other hand, with the handshake, Raila attracted goodness to himself. And for 3 years, he has been held captive in this warm handshake embrace. He is a prisoner. But last week in Kamukunji, he may have played reverse psychology on Uhuru. ODM accused Uhuru Kenyatta of betrayal, that he would not support Raila Odinga in 2022. This was a stroke of genius, because beyond the handshake, show me where Uhuru has ever pledged his allegiance to Raila for 2022. Uhuru never actually said he would support Raila in 2022.
That's right.
But after last week, this is the big elephant in the room for Uhuru to answer. I'll end with this. The politics of friendship is a two-edged concept. Although the immediate result is unity, the politics of friendship often leads to division. And this is because in politics, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. Succession politics is inherently competitive, and just maybe, the interests of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga with regard to 2022 are diametrically opposed. Who knows? I could be wrong. So we'll leave it at that.
Exactly.
And on that note, the Standard gets our
Winning headline.
by elimination. And now for our final thought, but before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit like.
And now our final thought. This week is inspired by International Women's History Month. So every day this week, we're going to take a look at a miraculous and amazing woman and just kind of dissect and understand who she was and what she contributed to the world today. So today we start with Queen Victoria, and this book is entitled Victoria the Queen, an intimate biography of the woman who ruled an empire, written by Julia Baird. Baird. Yeah, we'll see what happens. So, Victoria, she was a queen, she was an empress, and she once held the record for the longest serving British monarch. She served for 63 years on the throne, but she was surpassed by her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II, who has now been sitting on the throne for 69 years.
Wow.
So, though Victoria is remembered as a dumpy little woman who was in perpetual mourning, after her husband passed away, it was noted that she lived in black every day for the rest of her life until she passed away. The biographer in this book really tries to present her differently. So, the presentation in this book looks at Victoria in three distinct lights: Victoria the woman, Victoria the politician, and Victoria the monarch. So, born in 1819, Victoria inherited the throne at age 18 after her father's three elder brothers died without any legitimate heirs. So she was the fifth in line to succession, and at that time she was vilified by other family members who actually tried to sideline her. And she ascended to the throne as a teenager without a husband or any significant love interest. And so just for context, we have the Industrial Revolution, which is transforming the landscape of the country, and the British Empire, which was commanding so many more territories around the world. So in a world where women were often powerless, Victoria went on to rule the most powerful country on earth with a very decisive hand. She was an ordinary woman who was thrust into this very extraordinary role. So at 20 years old, she falls passionately in love and marries her first cousin, Prince Albert. That seems weird now, but it was very normal then. But the author is very perceptive to note about the way that she viewed this man as being like this perfect image. GK, you were telling me how all the soldiers
had to get their mustache.
Had to get them exactly Albert. The mustache matching Albert. But it's very weird because he would then undermine her in so many interesting ways. So the author says how in the 20 years of their marriage, that was the weakest period of her reign. Victoria took up this non-stop job of having children. She had 9 children in total, almost in complete succession, 1 year after the other. And at this time, she let Albert take on those roles of, being the leader. And while he was doing that, he was also being very condescending. The author notes that he called her dear child. Can you imagine your husband calling you?
You're the queen.
And he's like, my dear child. So she says that it's only after Albert's death that she could recover her grip as leader, return to politics, and deal with prime ministers that she either really liked or completely detested. All the while, she's really trying to win back her subjects' loyalty. People who looked at her like this woman who just gave up the power to her husband. So she ends up being this very outspoken woman with her ministers, overstepping conventional boundaries for a woman and really asserting her opinions. She survived 8 assassination attempts during the course of her lifetime. And all of this is happening while science, technology, democracy are really dramatically shaping the world. So she becomes this symbol of steadfastness and security in this country. And remember, at the time, she is the queen of a quarter of the world's population at the height of the British Empire's reign. So really incredible woman with such a vast, yo-yo kind of story. Very
you know who else is around the area of 5th in line? Is Prince Harry. He's like either fifth or sixth in line.
So we're saying don't
So
discount.
there's a chance.
Don't discount the fifth in line.
The way things are going.
He might be bumped up to like, taken down to like 10th in line. Let me speak a little bit about the levers of power and how Queen Victoria managed politics in her court, but more actually importantly in the country. So we're told that Queen Victoria proved really adept with the levers of power, more even than some of the men around her. And we're told that this came to the shock of many people around her. Her courtiers were unable to comprehend how a woman could exercise such power. And the evidence for this is given in the book extensively, and it's in the extent to which she was a robust and also interventionist monarch. So on the one hand, which is, I think, indicative of somebody who knows how to play power games, she carefully cultivated the image of a compliant, reclusive, and domesticated queen. And this is how the books immediately after her death cast her. But decades later, that point of view was completely revised upon further inquiry. And so we're told that she tried as hard as she could to ensure, for example, that she and the foreign secretary would decide matters of foreign policy together without there needing to be any conversations with cabinet. She bypassed prime ministers quite often to give her own directives to the generals, the military generals. She tried to prevent ministers and prime ministers whom she didn't like, such as Gladstone, from gaining and keeping power. She even participated in some schemes to do coups, some small coup d'etats within the political parties, and that got the author begging the question: what exactly was the role of the Queen then? And the author speaks about a political theorist, Walter Bagehot, in his seminal work, The English Constitution, authored in the year 1867, in which he says that the monarch herself had three principal rights: the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. But we can see that she went over and above all those rights to be more interventionist. Finally, Bagehot also says a few of the things about the role of the royal family I found this is very interesting in society. The first was to sweeten politics by the seasonable addition of nice and pretty events. The second function was to provoke loyalty amongst the uneducated or simple-minded, to be a visible symbol of unity to those still so imperfectly educated as to need a symbol. The third was to welcome foreign ministers and dignitaries. The fourth was to provide an example of morality. And the fifth was to provide stability during times of transition, which would serve as some kind of disguise for changes of government. I think she lived up to all these expectations of what was expected of her and her family.
I enjoyed finding out more about Queen Victoria. Just to take us back to Prince Harry and the Meghan thing, I felt that the institution, the firm, as they're being referred to, the monarchy, missed a real opportunity to transition into the century that we're living in.
Right.
Meghan Markle could have been sort of this ambassador for, race and embracing all these things. Anyway,
I don't think they want to embrace change.
They don't want to embrace change, but she could have been a good ambassador for them. What I liked about Queen Victoria is that her mom had seen the foresight of her perhaps ascending to the throne before she was ready and before her time. And so she was brought up in what is known as the Kensington system. And it was a strict timetable of lessons to improve Victoria's morality and intellect. So she would not go down things like...
How do you improve one's morality?
Well, apparently they did. A lot of studying and things like that. But she wasn't even allowed to walk downstairs unless someone held her hand. So there was a lot of etiquette things, but also a lot of reading about being educated, right, as a woman. So she grew up having this sort of keen sense of justice. She despised, interestingly enough, racial and religious prejudice. And I think there's a famous movie called Victoria and Abdul on Netflix, which tells of her relationship with her Indian servant, which was neatly sort of putting into context how big her empire was also growing. So you have a situation where in 1877, the prime minister then was a man named Benjamin Disraeli, and he pronounced her as the Empress of India. But he did not do this willingly. Victoria really understood the power of propaganda. If she was going to be the focal point of the empire, she needed everybody to know who she was.
Yeah.
So she dispatched her image, or made him dispatch her image to all these different outposts, right? And to call her the Empress of India. So she is also credited with sort of this profound rethinking of family life, but also the rise of religious doubt. She was also heading some things like anti-poverty and anti-slavery movements, which is unheard of in her time. Yeah. She was the first monarch to ride a train. So like Tujay has said, she was really at the helm of this industrialization sort of modernization era at that time. And so she rode her first train. So electricity had started to become common. Photography was becoming a popular medium as well. And the rail system started to spread across Britain. So there's lots to say about her. I'll stop there. But I like what you were saying, JM, about the fact that she wasn't just a constitutional queen, in the same way that you see Queen Elizabeth now. She actually ruled, which I think is fabulous. Yeah, she really did. So on a day where we had a winning headline from The Standard and a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation, I want to leave you with this. The past is truly foreign, and we cannot know how people thought, only their words and their deeds. So make sure your words and your deeds really count for something. Yeah. Have a lovely evening. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Pang Free to Air, and StarTimes.